You're watching Central Illinois on the Record.
All right, welcome back. We are joined by State Representative Ryan Spain. Thank you very much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Paul.
All right, so you are, I guess, in some ways, as a state lawmaker, enjoying the summer because at the end of session, on time, at least as long as you've been a lawmaker, a bipartisan balanced budget, although there are some questions, I guess, because it's based on an estimate whether the budget is truly balanced. How do you feel about the way the process went down this year?
I think I feel good about it because we're returning to what I would call the regular order of how the legislature should work. And so the summertime should be spent really not in Springfield going into overtime status for failing to pass a budget, but doing things back in your district, engaging in the constituent service issues that are most important. And that's the part of the job that I enjoy the most. So I'm very happy that we're able to work together in a reasonable manner, in a bipartisan, bicameral fashion, and pass a budget on time this year.
So I guess in some ways you've seen the worst of Springfield. You mentioned or alluded to last year, the overtime session, the veto override of the governor to force a budget through, and then this year, you mentioned the way it was supposed to be done, passing a budget on time in a bipartisan manner. Obviously, those are two vastly different scenarios in your short time in the General Assembly. But the ratings agencies have criticized this most recent budget as having a hole in it hundreds of millions of dollars wide. Business as usual, they say, in Illinois. How do you respond to that?
I would disagree with the rating agencies, and I understand the type of evaluation that they go through. But listen, we're in a situation now where we're beginning to pay down our old bills. We're making some very substantial changes in our public employee pensions, looking to bend that pension cost curve, which has been an important priority for the rating agencies for many, many years now. And so all budgets have assumptions. This one is no different, but I think we were very conservative in those assumptions, and already we're seeing some of the things that we put in as placeholders into the budget are beginning to pan out. The Supreme Court's decision on the Wayfair case for online sales tax collection is a great example of that, something that was, I think, very appropriately included in the budget. That will materialize as some additional revenue for both the state of Illinois and our local communities.
And the other issue, or the other aspect of the budget process that everybody seems to be celebrating in some way, shape, or form is the bipartisanship. There wasn't the political rancor, and some folks, I think, on both sides of the aisle, whether publicly or privately, are attributing that to the governor maybe taking a back seat in some respects to the process. Obviously, it was part of the leadership meetings, but some folks are saying he wasn't quite as vocal in those meetings, pushing his turnaround agenda this year, and they're saying maybe that's because it was an election year, and he can go out on the campaign trail now and say, hey, we have a budget.
Well, I think it's great that we have a budget. I think the governor was very involved. The difference between last year and this year is last year we had a very large tax increase on the table as part of the discussion. And much of the discussion was, if you're going to raise taxes on the citizens and businesses of Illinois, what are you going to do to offset that tax increase with something else that could be assigned to say, we want business to expand here, and we want pro-economic growth in the state of Illinois. That's my frustration with where we were a year ago, because we didn't achieve that. We voted and had a tax increase. I didn't support it, but we didn't do, I believe, the offsetting important things to facilitate economic growth. We need it in Illinois because we're not growing jobs, and we're certainly not growing population at the same rate as the other surrounding states. So for this year, I think the governor was very much involved, but we really did return to a regular order where you use rank and file lawmakers, you use the appropriation process that is in place in both the House and the Senate to deliver a balanced budget.
Are you concerned that any of the progress that was made on a bipartisan basis could be lost at the end of this, what I guess could casually be described as a divisive election cycle?
Sure. I mean, this will be a very divisive election cycle. It's already being estimated this could be one of the most expensive, maybe the most expensive governor's race in the history of our country. And so with that type of lens, you imagine that there will be some difficulties. But I hope that the relationships of incumbent lawmakers that will continue to serve will help persevere through whatever we have in this election cycle. Obviously, the governor's race is important within the Illinois House where I serve. We're looking to pick up seats in the Republican Party, which I represent, and feel that that would be an important issue for changing the way and certainly the leadership structure that has existed in our state for 40 plus years.
The governor has proposed a pretty large infrastructure plan. Some say it certainly doesn't go far enough to address the needs across the state. He hasn't talked a lot about funding. Several months ago, I talked to Leader Brady, and he had mentioned a possible pay for as an expansion of gambling. Obviously, that had failed at the end of session. No. But there has been some talk, obviously, about sports betting, given the decision by the Supreme Court to allow states to access sports betting, and Illinois certainly seems primed to tap into that. Do you see any of these issues being addressed after the election in November session, or maybe pushing that off into the next session when some new fresh faces are in Springfield?
Sure, it's a great question, and I do see it coming forward. And so the question is, do we need a new infrastructure program? Do we need a capital bill in the state of Illinois? I think undeniably you'd ask anyone that question and they would say yes. And so I hope it can be something that we work hard on for the fall session. If not, we need to tackle it at the beginning of 2019 as the new General Assembly would be seated. But the big question is, how do you pay for something with this magnitude? And the last major capital bill that we had was 10 years ago, and it was paid for by video gaming to a large extent throughout the state. So the question is the pay for. And how do you generate the revenue necessary to pay for this infrastructure spending at a time where we've just endured a tax increase, an income tax increase, and we have other cost drivers that you worry about? Because in Illinois, we're in such desperate need to preserve our population, to grow talent in this state, and we're losing people. So you don't want to push people out of the state while we would determine how to invest in infrastructure. And I think that'll be the balancing act. Sports betting could be a component. There may be some other issues that we look at. I would like to see our infrastructure programs become more sustainable so that we're not waiting every 10 years and figuring out how to create a brand new revenue stream out of thin air in order to pay for a major capital program.
All right, well, it'll be interesting to see how that might play out either in the fall or maybe in the next session. All right, State Representative Ryan Spain, thank you very much for spending some time with us. We appreciate it. You're watching Central Illinois on the Record, and we'll be right back.